to hopefully finish the edits to policy number 202. I think we got through most of it. We're on number 6, I think, of the the main heading, number 6. And I feel like one of the things that kind of took such a long time last time was going through word by word and wordsmithing, and it just kind of just ate up a lot of time. We only have an hour today, so I would like to, instead of talking line by line, talk about each section and really capture the intent behind each one, and then let staff work on the wording, and then we'll get that out, the next agenda, and then we can send in individual edits, and just in the interest of time and making sure we capture everybody's ideas, and then the wording can come later. So I think are we on posting of the agenda? I think you guys talked about this after. What? The posting of the agenda. I think Teresa and Rick and I left a little early.
I did. I had a date with Zoe.
And then you and Mary and everyone decided you could do it Thursday instead of Friday, or do we want to?
Yeah, I think that was the request,
Memorialize that, or-
and we didn't have a quorum anymore at that point, so we were just taking just feedback.
Okay.
And the request was, from a board perspective, or from a director perspective, it'd be great to have a little more time to do the reading. So we like to post a little bit earlier, and so as much as possible, I think there's limitations that are the baseline requirements that are in here, but we will do our best to do it 24 hours earlier on Thursday at noon versus Friday at noon. And I think we could.
And Friday at 4:30 is the requirement at 5 days in advance, is that it?
It's actually,
Yeah.
it's 72 hours, so legally it's Sunday, but we, by practice, post the Friday. We do business days.
And you can do it on Thursday? It'd be great if you can.
I think we can endeavor to do that. How's that? And I think it may just depend on timing and the volume of agenda items sometimes. So I think the fallback position would be Friday at noon, but if we are able to tackle things much more quickly, or if the agenda's not as loaded, then we certainly could produce that earlier. Yeah.
Okay. Is everybody okay with that?
I think it's great.
Okay.
If you succeed in your endeavor.
Actually, can I ask you a question about that? Is it legally possible, because I was making a comment earlier, like these last few agendas have actually been quite easy to get through on the stuff. They've not taken forever. If something like the facilities maintenance plan is going to be like 100-page reading on something, is it possible, like, could we get that well in advance of the board book? Like, we know probably Monday that's going to be in the board book for the next week. If there's any kind of big research thing like that, would it be possible to share that before the board book with us?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think we
Yeah.
have in the past, because I've gotten it in the mail like 2 weeks ahead of time.
Right.
Don't you remember getting those big binders in the mail?
No, because I always did it all the online stuff, but
Okay.
yeah.
But yeah, it's usually, I feel like the big ones, like the FMP, and that sort
Yeah.
of thing's been way advanced, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, hopefully that's been past practice here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so number 6, to facilitate feedback and clarifying questions on agenda items, Q&A will be formulated by the general manager. So I think we've all experienced this. By noon, all of our questions and feedback are due, if we have any. In-person meetings. This seems pretty clear to me. Does anybody have any questions or comments on number 6?
No.
Okay. Oh, great. Thank you. Meeting protocols, public comment. Members of the public are invited to comment on any item relevant to district business. Limited to 3 minutes. So the public comment, you know, we had switched it at the beginning of the year. I think at Josh's suggestion, or maybe might have been Lauren's or Kevin's, but we had a meeting to try to move things along more quickly. And it was suggested to have public comment before the presentation so that people who had questions in public comment, those questions might be answered during the presentation instead of having to go back. So we have done that. I got some pushback on it the last time with the Parks and Rec presentation.
Yeah, I think it's a bad idea, because a lot of people didn't want to comment until they heard their proposal.
Okay, so you think we should do it after?
I thought it was a good idea. I mean, they ended up getting they could comment again after they did it, but I thought that was the cart before the horse with Parks and Rec.
Okay.
That's my opinion. I don't really care how we do it, as long as they get their shot after the presentation.
After the presentation. Well, Rob and I talked about it last week, and his point was, you know, there's usually not a lot of public comment anyway, so we could do both.
Well, it happens on that one, there was a lot of public comment.
There was a lot of email comment. I mean, we knew there was going to be a lot of pushback on that one, but yeah. So, what do you think? What are your feelings on this?
I tend to agree with Rick on this. What I wonder, as far as being able to answer public comment questions, is if we did follow the protocol of that there is a presentation and then there's board clarifying questions, and then there's public comment and then board deliberations, then public comment does get an opportunity to hear the presentation, maybe ask questions, and then in deliberations, we could address any questions.
Okay. That would work.
But I was actually curious about putting public comment at the front, because I felt like what had happened in the last meeting with people who didn't have the context of it. I kind of thought I could understand that, but I figured that there was some discussion about it.
Right.
But can you elaborate on why was it considered that was it just because they would be able to pose a question that we could then address?
Well, one of the things that was happening was, and everybody did this, actually Kevin did it a few times too, but there would be some back and forth during public comment. Because sometimes there would be a quick question that you can answer, and then all of a sudden everybody wants to ask questions, and it turns into a dialogue instead of what it's supposed to be, which is absorbing what the public is concerned about, and then trying to alleviate their concerns in some way.
Understood.
So, Teresa, you have any thoughts?
I mean, I'd like to say it in the beginning and in the end, but I only do 5-hour meetings.
Yeah.
I'll wait away.
The other question is, it's 3 in here? I've heard 5 sometimes. Is it 3 or 5? Josh?
It's whatever the board decides, right? So if we stick with 3 in here, it'll be 3 going forward. It's been 3 lately.
Okay, I'm happy with 3.
If you wanted to go 5, you could. Anything less than 2 is suspect.
Well, 3 is more than 2.
Yep, 3 would work.
Okay.
Mary, do you have any comments?
I think that it's important to do the presentation and then have people ask their questions. And because not everybody reads a board book, and there's a lot of stuff that is talked about in a presentation. So I think the idea of doing the presentation, the board asking questions, the community asking questions, deliberation, I think that definitely we go after the presentation.
Okay, so if we go after, we don't have a chance, if they have questions, a lot of the time it's just a comment.
But if they have questions, we as a board member we're not dialoguing with them, we are saying, I like that question, consultant, please answer it.
Yeah, I think it just gets a little bit messy. Then, what if you don't like the question? Then you're kind of policing how that public comment is going.
Well, we as a board are,
Are you
Yeah,
saying
there's
the
things
board's
that-
deliberating after the public comment? Because that would give us an opportunity to say that,
right,
right?
That would
So
be
that's
true.
what David suggested, okay, yeah, okay.
because, we as a board have sometimes had many comments that, people bring up stuff and it's like, oh, an aha moment, let's talk about that.
Okay,
And, yeah, so, great.
I was in the Board of Supervisors meeting yesterday, and I thought the way they handled it worked well. We're in the public comment phase, people could ask questions, and then when it returned back to the deliberation, then the chair made the decision about asking the presenter to answer specific questions. So the questions weren't answered in the middle of the public comment period, it was afterwards.
okay, sounds good. Okay, item,
So that would mean that public comments are invited after agenda topic, after presentations are made.
right, so what I have written down is presentation, clarifying questions, public comment by the board, public comment, and then board deliberation, in which we can also ask for the presenter to clarify something.
Right.
Okay,
And so that last statement of public comments may be invited before or after agenda topics.
okay,
Lauren's just made that change, so that last sentence kind of is not appropriate under 4 IB, right? In blue.
oh, yeah.
Lauren, you're magic. Look at that. What we can do with Zoom. There we go. Great.
Okay. Okay, so on to C, general rules. Members. So I don't know, does anybody have any comments on this process?
How common is it, Josh, to have, this used to happen a lot, we've cleaned up. And the whole idea of getting into discussions with the public, I'm not sure I agree with it. So even if it's the board president or consensus of the board, I'm just kind of wanting Josh, you go to a lot of meetings, tell me.
I would say that it is very uncommon to allow members of the public to participate in meetings unless it's a very small agency in an informal area. I think most districts recognize that it makes it a little bit impractical to try to run a meeting if members of the public are participating. I think what this may be getting at, which I do see quite often, I wouldn't say quite often, but a fair amount, would be an applicant or somebody who's uniquely affected by a decision, like somebody who's providing a presentation or something. I think in those cases, you will allow them to participate in the same manner you allow staff.
Right, but that is, but that would be a presenter. So yes, of course you're going to have a discussion with them, but the idea of members of the public shall not be permitted to enter board discussions and deliberations, period. I mean, staff, I guess if we ask staff a question, we want them to participate. And this would preclude that, so I'm not sure and staff is valuable, and a period after deliberations and not have that last phrase is what I'm understanding from what you're saying. Because the presenter is going to be able to interact with the board.
Yeah, well, I think Well, I think this gets to 2 points. I mean, I think the point on the member of the public, I agree with everything that you said, Mary. I think that captured it. But I think on staff, this is trying to capture something which the board has been, I think, really gracious of it. You know, as staff is, you have allowed us to interject our opinions or thoughts and haven't kind of waited for us to ask questions or for permission to interject. You know, but in some boards that are a little bit more formal, they will require that, right? And so if staff wishes to speak, they'll say, you know, President, you know, we'd like to address that. Is that okay? So I think that, you know, that would be the question for the board is, you know, to what extent, or, you know, do you think members of the public should participate? I think that's a discussion point. And the second point is, to what extent should staff be participating in discussion?
I'd like to hear from staff if they have something to say.
Me too.
Me as well.
Lauren, Kelly, please offer your opinions as well. I think it'll ebb and flow, to be honest. Sometimes, depending on the topic, it is probably very rigid and needs to be very regulated and controlled by the president of the board, and you probably don't want us interjecting. And so it would be a more formal, you know, Director Rolfe, I'd like to make a statement on that, and then be invited in to make a statement. For the vast majority of the time, I think it is, as Josh has noted, it's been more of a collegial conversation of not interrupting the board, but offering opinions and suggestions as we talk about things. And I think that's probably what we find the majority of the time, from my experience.
Yeah. Agreed.
But these are the rules we
We
operate
absolutely
under, so if
disagree.
it- Yeah, members of the public and staff shall not be permitted. By having and staff, that takes away the collegial aspect. So to me, it seems like we should be deleting and staff. And everything after deliberations should be deleted. That's where I'm landing. I'm curious
agree
what
with that.
other people are thinking.
Yeah. Because we've always treated the public and staff differently. They've
Right.
always had different, so I don't like having them lumped together in this. Yeah, I agree with your edits, Mary. Anybody else?
Sounds good.
I'm confused. So, okay, that now I'm not confused.
I was just waiting.
I thought, isn't this exactly what we just said we didn't want? But now it makes sense. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Yay!
Are you okay, David, with the last?
Yeah, the only
So
thing
it's-
in my notes from before on there was just that if we need, I love that we're referring to a policy because I'm all about that modularity and referring to things. I would just say that language not in the spirit of blah, 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 blah will not be tolerated. Because that way we can edit, or maybe not, but I mean, if the JEDI policy instruction is edited in the future, it automatically applies, as opposed to somebody saying, well, that, what you just said there wasn't specifically mentioned in there. Because I think it's just in the language of, or the spirit of what we're trying to do is captured in the JEDI thing, and I think if we just refer to that instead of adding the derogatory racial, sexual, ethnic, sexual orientation, or similar slurs. And that's all
If I could add, I found that sometimes when you just reference a policy that isn't readily accessible,
That's true.
it's hard to communicate what you're trying to get across. And so that's why I think a little bit of description, even if it's not perfect, ideally we would be updating it if things update. But it helps really orient people about the types of things that we're asking folks not to engage in. So a little bit of description, I think sometimes with the policy definition itself doesn't always get the message across. So that's all I would offer.
I can understand that. The one thing I would suggest then doing, like in my history of doing documentation and all that, is that there's a backward reference. When we reference a document, that we go into that document and then reference that this has been referenced in the following places.
Yeah,
So that
that's a great best practice.
if you-
Yeah,
that way you're
good
covered.
recommendation, right.
There might be, I mean, I don't think in a situation like this that we're ever gonna get in, like, one day we're gonna decide, oh, it's okay to do derogatory language of this type. So it's not like it's ever gonna be more permissible, but if it becomes more restrictive and then somebody challenges that was never mentioned in that policy, that was just my concern. Happy to leave.
And I think one other thing to think about, regardless of how we land on this language, is I think it is good to refer to the policy directly. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think one thing to remember, though, is the public will have broader First Amendment rights than vendors under our policy or others. And so, I think it's important for the board to show, what our mission is and what we, expect everyone to how they will interact and provide comment at meetings. But at the end of the day, if someone wants to say things that are distasteful, they're going to have that right unless they're actually interrupting the meeting. And it'll just be something we'll have to deal with on a case-by-case basis.
It's a great note, Josh. It's not always desirable, but it is a reality, right?
So then, just in making sure that we're defining policy that's actually something we can use, in other places we have said, we've used the term is discouraged as opposed to shall not be tolerated. To me, shall not be tolerated means that there's concrete consequence for it. So if we're saying that that's not, that we can't require that legally because of First Amendment, then as a guidance, should we just say that should be discouraged?
I think discourage is too soft, I think, not, yeah.
I would agree too. I'm just thinking what, if Josh is saying that members of the public actually do have the right to do this, then it's a question of, well, your policy says that you won't tolerate that, and then that person just said that. That's what I wonder about.
Is the board president allowed to cut someone off at a minute if they're being particularly rude? Josh?
No. So being rude isn't the standard. The standard is disruptive. Yeah.
Disruptive. Can we say that these sort of things are disruptive to our meeting and shall not be tolerated?
We cannot, unfortunately. So there is the best example of this is there's a Ninth Circuit case out of I believe it's Santa Cruz, where someone used the F word and then did a Heil Hitler salute to the council, and they tried to enforce that under their policy, which banned profanity, and the Ninth Circuit said even as distasteful as that might be, it didn't disrupt the meeting, and so it was permissible.
Okay.
What this is, you're talking about speech, where we got into specifically with certain comments from one of the air show committee members. We basically made a rule. Pardon me.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Must have been what this meeting here. We said we won't do business with people who do that, which is different than speech.
Absolutely, and the policy really is focused on vendors for that reason.
Right.
And the rules are very different.
So what defines disruptive?
We would have to figure that out on a case-by-case basis. President Rolfe, I apologize, but examples of what we've seen are unfortunately I've seen people standing up in meetings and heckling other speakers, trying to interrupt the board deliberation outside of public comment, catcalling, cheering or booing during other commenters, kind of all these things. And what generally happens in these situations is it's sort of a process where first you warn everybody, and then someone does it again, and you give everyone a second chance and a final warning, and then if someone does it again, you kick them out. And if it's the whole audience, then the Brown Act actually has a provision to kick everybody out except the members of the media can come back in.
Oh, okay.
So what's the wording we should have here, Josh?
So I would be comfortable even with the with shall not be tolerated, because I think that is an expression of intent by the board. But I think David's point is well taken. What signal does this send to the average person reading it? So one idea would be to leave it as shall not be tolerated, and then add a sentence that refers to disruptive attendees will not be permitted to remain in the meeting pursuant to the Brown Act or something like that, just to clarify that shall not be tolerated doesn't actually mean we're going to stop them from speaking or requiring that they leave the meeting. That's just one thought.
I like it. Get it, Lauren.
Josh, could you separately
Josh.
recommend a sentence to us?
Yeah, can you send
Okay.
it?
Sorry. Disruptive attendees.
You don't have to do it live. You can send it to us afterwards, Josh. That's
Yeah, I'll send it to you. Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll send it offline.
Okay. All right, is everybody happy?
I'm happy.
So you'll send it out again, Lauren? And then what do we do? Do we approve it someday?
So these sets of policies, the governance policies, will be reviewed and approved by you guys in September. So this will be part of the lot.
So
Fantastic.
we'll put it on consent for September.
Great,
Yeah,
perfect.
unless you want to pull it. Right?
No, consent is great. All right, thank you, everybody. That's good work. Got it done. Yay. Okay, so I think Kelly and Rob, you guys are next.
Okay. Thank you, President Rolfe. Board, we are at the beginning of the 2023 budget cycle, and I'm new to the airport's budget cycle, so I've been working at the very basic level of looking at, as I've talked to individual directors over the last couple months, about what I'm seeing in the current operating budget and capital budget. And so that's led probably to a little more detail and scrutiny going into this budget process, because it just wasn't another budget year with a staff that's used to doing these all the time. We still have a lot of staff that's used to doing these all the time, but I'm slowing it down a little bit as the new person here and taking a comprehensive look about how we're doing things. As we go forward in the budget process, one of the things I'm recommending, if we go to the next slide, is rather than a 4 or 5 month long budget process, is really just a very focused budget process that includes today's first workshop, is really looking at our capital projects, our first blush at those for next year, and talking a little bit more about long-term reserve policies and plans. And we have some thoughts and recommendations on that. And then the next meeting would be that 28 September meeting, where we really have a fairly solid first draft of both the operating budget proposed and the capital budget based on today's meeting that we review in detail with the board of directors. Doing that in September, late September, gives us a whole nother month of results for this year, of actuals, which is really helpful. And I'm sure Kelly always prefers to have actual budget numbers from the year to plan next year, as opposed to just forecasting a longer period of time for the remaining part of this year. Allows us to prepare more solid numbers. And this extra month also allows me time to work with the management team to really dig into the details as we look at introducing new opportunities for revenue streams, looking at our expenses. That extra time I'll use quite hopefully successfully to work with the team here to really dial in the budget even more. And then that would bring us to, based on the board review on the 28th of September, that bring us to a final workshop, the third one on the 26th of October. And that would be our final opportunity to kind of do some fine tuning of the budget with a little bit more time of results of actual, being able to take the board's guidance in the second workshop and incorporate that into the budget, operating and capital. and really come to a final budget in that 26 October timeframe, so we can finalize that. That's what we're proposing as a budget timeline this year. I know it's a little bit different than perhaps you've experienced in past years, but hopefully with that concentrated effort, and focused effort, it'll be a successful approach.
Well, we approved the budget 5 weeks earlier, which I think is a good thing. And you didn't send out asking for what we think should be in the budget, which is also a good thing.
Yes, it's a little different process. Both those points you make, Rick, are absolutely correct. Rather than even with the staff sending out a wish list of what do you want for next year, we're approaching I see that as management's responsibility to build a draft budget and then present that and then begin moving from that point, whether it's with staff or with the board, rather than just a blank sheet of paper every year. I think that might be more helpful and focused. There's a lot of experience here between the board and management, so I think we should be able to dial it in pretty good. Yes. Any other thoughts on budget timelines or this process? The next slide. Mary, did you have a comment? Sorry.
No, this is sounding good.
Thank you. You recognize this slide. As I go into the budget process, I just want to remind us all that this is a model that a lens in which I'm using to look at all the aspects of our budget, whether it's capital savings, capital investment, or operating budgets, and where we're focused on things. And so I'll use this as a lens as we talk about reserves long-term today in our capital projects recommendations, at least initially. And as we move forward in the operating budget scrutiny, it's not overly focused on one of these four quadrants, but I'm trying to find a balance between all four of these quadrants to have a good, sustainable budget for next year that has a lot of aspects to it. Next slide. I'm going to do a little bit of back and forth with Kelly here and ask her to talk a little bit of summary numbers, and then I'm going to interject back again. How's that?
Sounds good. Every year we talk a little bit just to show where we're at with our actuals. So this is through actuals through July 31st, and then the rest of the year budgeted. So we're looking at 15 million forecasted revenue, and same on the expense side, 15 million. So ending up around about 100,000 on the plus side, which is better than what we had budgeted. And also, if we can continue our cost savings and all the strides we've made this year on saving money and boosting the revenue, we could do better than that, hopefully. Shooting to end the end of the year at 5 million in cash.
And we started the year at 6.9 million.
Correct.
Correct.
And usually what we forecast is light because we don't spend money. Is that accurate?
True.
Pardon me, I wasn't using the mic, Lauren.
I was a little conservative on this front, so we'll, as Rob was talking about, looking at actuals in the next month or so.
You know, you're
as
in
we go
accounting,
through
you're supposed to be conservative.
I know.
Yes. So the next slide.
I have a question.
Yes, Mayor.
End of 2021, the audited end cash balance was 6.9 million. And with forecasted and understanding we're in July, we're plus 100 grand, but yet your ending cash balance is 5 million. So that's a drop of 1.9, actually 2 million, rounding error, 6.9 versus, so I'm just confused because it would seem like our ending cash balance should go to should go up 100 grand from the 6.972. What am I missing?
In the annual audit that you have that came out earlier this year, there was a projection both with the budget plan and the audit that forecasted based on the capital spend for this year, a lower ending cash balance was actually the forecast. I think it was actually the forecast was around 6 million.
Right, and the 100,000, Mary, is net income at the end at 12/31/22 for the year. So not in relation to cash.
Accounting, okay.
And I'll find the page where that was on the audit in a minute. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this is a slide that you have seen in past years, a different format, but all the fields are the same. And this was on the left side here, this is related to capital reserves, the prior kind of discussion points. We haven't changed any of these numbers for this year. This is kind of the methodology that was that has been used for a couple of years now. The target reserves on the left side is pavement maintenance capital reserve, facility maintenance capital reserve, land management capital reserve, general fund operating reserve, annoyance reductions and communication program reserve, rolling stock reserve, property acquisition, debt retirement, and future capital projects. These are areas that I like to separate the concepts of these a little bit, because what we have in here is we have some operating concepts and spending mixed in with our capital reserve concepts. And so rather than rolling this forward, what I have in the subsequent slides is we're just pulling out all the operating types of spending, annoyance reductions, communications reserves, the operating cash reserves. Those are things that are very specific to our operating budget every year, and not necessarily something that we're reserving capital money for specific programs and priorities. So those I'm going to, in the subsequent slides, as I mentioned, we're not going to address today, but we'll be addressing those in the operating budget when we present the draft of that. The other ones all are these categories, and of course we don't have separate designated reserve fund buckets for each of these areas that are mentioned here. What we have, the board's aware of, and the members of the community may be aware of, is that we have a policy, a board policy that's included in the board materials today, a policy instruction that talks about undesignated reserves. And it's not, the money for capital projects is not designated for specific items or specific funds that is, that carries forward, that communicates that you're going to do certain things, and you put money aside just for that. What we have here is just a big pot of money, and we have one operating fund and then some designation, some loose designations, and some policies around that. We don't have different designated funds. Kelly, you want to add anything to this slide?
Yeah, just in the past, we do have these kind of general items reserved on the balance sheet, but not a specific bucket for on the cash side of here's where all.
They're just an idea. They're not an actual reserve. If we wanted to set up a reserve separate, how would we do that?
Well, we have it on the balance sheet. There's reserves. You'll see it toward the bottom under liabilities.
Yeah, but how do you keep the board to keep their fingers out of it?
So we're looking at that based on today's guidance about where we would go forward, about if the board's in consensus on establishing reserve funds specific to some areas that I'm going to recommend. Then there is a process we can go through to set up some accounts associated with those, and a process to determine how we decide what balance should be in there going forward. And I'll talk through those in a couple slides here if it makes sense. I've also passed out a California Special District Association article that was a few years ago about reserve policies and reserve planning to add some more. It wasn't in the reading material ahead of time. It's a take-home, something for us to discuss as we go forward here. But it at a high level talks about the need for designating reserves and building reserves. As we look at, as mentioned earlier, 6.9 million ending last year. We potential end this year based on our capital spend Kelly's forecast conservatively 5, ideally we'll do better than that, $1 million cash. That's not a lot of cash reserves for an organization of this size and the complexity of the facilities we have and future projects that we may be considering. As I mentioned in previous discussions, our reserves should be much more robust, I would say, at this point in our maturity. Next slide, please.
Will you put my copy of that in my box and I'll pick it up?
I will. I sent you an electronic one, but I'll put a paper copy in your
okay.
mailbox. I know.
I'm cutting.
We'll have it for you, no problem. So what I'm recommending is that we establish 3 on the capital side of the house, things that are long-term investments or things that are costly investments in infrastructure here, essentially. Things that cost more than $2,000 are going to last longer than 2 years. And there's different types of things that fit in that category. And these are the 3 categories that I think are very common out there. We can, mess with the language a little bit. These are things I think a lot of communities that live in homeowners associations or other type of special districts are used to seeing as fund pots. So it's a little bit of common terminology is partly why I'm using it. So members of the public would recognize, and when they see these, they would understand, more likely to understand what they are than just undesignated reserves.
And these reserves at homeowners association, which is more regulated by the state than other things, they need to be updated periodically because we're going through something at Lahanan where we're grossly under-reserved, and there's a vote going for a $3,000 per lot over 509 lots assessment, which is significant. And it'll be interesting to see whether it passes or not. And it came from not really checking reserves out on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's very common, unfortunately, particularly in the homeowner association. I can speak from experience as well. And so from a special district standpoint for our airport district, these 3 buckets, the first one would be, replacement reserve is perhaps your biggest long-term fund that would be created, and it would be updated and reviewed every 3 to 5 years. And that it'd probably be something we have a policy around all these reserve funds that we put in place, not just a policy instruction, but actually a reserve fund policy that would talk about the frequency of updating it and reviewing. For example, the reserve replacement policy looks at all the infrastructure that's here across the airport district that we own, from actual full facilities to it's akin to the facility maintenance plan that was done here a few years ago that we use, that identifies all the components of buildings and talks about the useful life of those components and when they logically would be replaced. And you plan for the future of when those things would logically be replaced based on the manufacturer's recommended useful life. And then when that, say it's a hot water heater that has a 10-year useful life, at 10 years, you've reserved enough money to replace that hot water heater. You go and look at that hot water heater and determine whether or not it needs to be replaced or whether or not you're going to extend the useful life of it. And the same is true with paint on buildings, that's large capital expenses, vehicles that we have here within the district. They all have a recommended useful life, and we put that on a large schedule, much of which is in the facility maintenance plan. And then we use that schedule to determine how many reserve funds we actually should have at each given point over a 30-year time span. Particularly paying close attention to the next 5 years of time, where we should be close to 100% reserve funded, where we actually can know we have money in the bank to actually replace those items if they need to be replaced. The 30-year plan would probably be more like 25 or 30% funded at the full value of the replacement reserve. So that's one recommended reserve fund that would be created. The other one was much smaller, new machinery equipment. This would be for things that don't actually exist here today. This would be something that we revisit every year. It wouldn't probably be a large fund. Maybe it's $100,000, $200,000 would be about all that we would keep funded every year. And for the kind of organization like here, is that if we needed another snow removal piece of equipment that we don't have now, we're not replacing one, but we need a whole nother one because we just can't keep up with the increased snow capacity. That would be an example of a new piece of equipment that doesn't exist here today. And so we set aside specific money, we'd approve that in the annual budget, buy a new piece of snow removal equipment for $100,000. It's a really expensive one. And then we would take that and add it to the reserve study. And then we'd have a plan for that when it wears out in 10 years, for example, to replace it or to extend the life of it. And we've reserved money towards replacing that in the future. The development fund, the last one here, is the idea that we have a lot of studies here that look at a number of ideas that are large investments for this organization. Utilization of the vacant land that we have, airside or non-airside, relocation of existing facilities, destroying a whole hangar row and replacing it with a brand new hangar row, building a whole new facility that serves a different purpose here. In addition, much like the Clear Capital building across the way here, what we call the Clear Capital building. Those are things that are very costly investments. A brand new parking lot doesn't exist here. That we should identify as very specific plans and estimated cost of what those are. We should get those approved by the board. And then we should identify how much money we need to save and how much we think we can save every year to get to the point where we could actually go to construction. And identifying that list of big ideas as a development fund allows us to target, when we look at our operating fund budget, of how much we need to be saving every year, essentially, from the different sources of revenue that we have, so that we start funding these three different principal reserve, development, and new equipment funds, so that we are healthy and wealthy as we go into the future and can do the things that we want to do, and perhaps not borrow as much money, or if we do want to borrow money, that we can show that we have adequate reserves and we're well reserved both on a cash basis and on a long-term capital basis, so we actually get good bond ratings and we're able to borrow at good rates if we want to do that, if we want to advance the speed at which we want to do some development things. Next slide, or any other comments?
I have a question on this.
Sure.
I have a couple of questions. One is on the development aspect. And like the Clear Capital money, that was paid for with property taxes. And then income that it makes stay on the community. You know, if we want to think about if you use airport money to do something, if that money that, like, when we're talking about landing fees later, that money has to stay on the field. If the Clear Capital money crosses that line, it now becomes airport money. And it can only be used on the airfield. And so within this development, you know, it looks like you've got it all grouped together, whereas developing vacant land, that would probably only be justified through property tax money, but then it shouldn't be lumped with hangar roads.
Yeah, you certainly can use your different sources of revenue for a hangar road development, absolutely. There's no prohibition on the source of revenue from property taxes or airside revenues to do something on the airside. The opposite is not true, correct. You cannot use airside revenues to develop something that has absolutely nothing to do with the airside operations.
Exactly.
So we would have to look at that and make sure that we're very clear about what the project is and where the source of funding is coming from for those projects. Absolutely.
And so that's kind of a bifurcated development, that it needs to be part A and part B.
The executive hangars are very different than the Clear Capital building. It seems to me that the Clear Capital was not airside,
Right.
and the executive hangars, we built them, we borrowed some money, and we don't, you know, the revenue doesn't cover the debt service until we pay it off, and then it goes way up. But we are paying the debt service from on airside hangar revenue. So I think those two are bifurcated, and for example, if we develop something on Soaring Way, non-aviation, that should be totally separate from airside. I think that's what you're saying, isn't it, Mary?
Yeah, but I mean, the reality is, and I do believe the cost allocation study, that the revenue from the existing hangars, the only ones that make money are the regular, some of the regular executive hangars. There's the T hangars, exec hangars, super exec hangars. We lose money on the T hangars. We lose money on the super exec hangars, and they're being paid for out of property taxes, those losses. Because if you only look at revenue, you have to look at expenses.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with you, because I'm not sure I agree with the cost allocation study, which I'm refusing to go over with you.
You and I have gone back and forth on that, but I do believe in it.
Yes, indeed.
And Kevin said it was not biased, and you think it's biased, so, but if.
Kevin who?
Kevin Smith.
I knew who you were talking about.
So I think where we started on this particular point.
What I'm getting at.
Yeah.
But the point being, if we use property tax dollars to build hangars, and then any revenue those hangars make stay on the airfield side. But I don't know that it's appropriate to use property tax dollars, and it might be appropriate to build some of these entities using property tax dollars. But to me, there's a line. And build the Clear Capital building, and that money is in a different pot and shouldn't cross over the line onto airfield. If we do something else on all the property we own on Soaring Way and Chandel Way or other places, that is not something that should be subsidizing the airfield side. And so we need to be very clear and distinct in this separation in development.
I hear what you're saying, but we don't, dollars are dollars. We don't keep separate pots. Just like
Very much.
the reserves.
We can, yeah.
Yeah, from a revenue standpoint, the property tax revenue there's no prohibition for using that for investment for any of these funds on the airfield side or the land side. There's no fencing of that revenue. It's only the opposite way.
Yeah, I think what Mary was getting at, which I agree with her on, if you use property tax money to build a facility that generates revenue that is then restricted on the air side, there's no way to pay back the property side for its investment in that. And I think that's what she's talking about. Mary, am I correct?
Yeah, and
Well, I think there's.
we are able to do things with our property tax dollars. Let's say we build a bunch of Clear Capitals, a bunch of WOB buildings out there, and we make money on that. That then becomes money we can use in the community. It's a different pot. Kirsch has been extremely clear about this over time. And again, half of our operating budget this year is coming from our shareholders, from the community. And to then say, you're paying, and then to tell them they're paying for hangars and annoyance does not seem right. Whereas if we can do things in the community at large, and that seems beneficial. So to me, when you say development, this needs to be a part A and a part B. Part A being airfield, or airside, part B being landside. There is an artificial line, and I have to see that.
Yeah, I'm okay with that concept. My point is, and I think the legal perspective is that the property tax revenue are eligible to invest in the airport on
Correct.
the air side or non-air side. Whether or not you have returning revenues that you can use external to the air side is a matter of fact and a matter of board decision about how you want to invest the money. But I mean, the property tax revenue is for the district.
Right. And the shareholders, people who pay half of our operating district, off of our operating costs, are the owners of the district,
Yes,
not just users.
right, so it's for the investment into the district assets, right? It's not,
Correct.
there's not necessarily a line that says you have to return it to the community.
Right.
If you invest in
Well,
things that benefit the
or-
community, then that's certainly discussed. That's the kind of projects that you talk about in the development fund. And again, we're only talking about the capital investment here today and funds, not the operating fund. So
Right.
how you want to benefit the community, if you go back a couple slides to the, sustainability slide there, there's a lot of different ways to benefit the community with your investments in capital, whether it's in the natural resource side or the operational efficiency side of our airside operations. So mostly what I'm talking about is this economic viability piece is having a very deliberate plan about saving money for your capital investment for the future. And I don't know that we have a very well-defined plan to be doing that.
And that's fine, I just,
Yeah.
I mean, you're working towards something, I like it, it's just, I don't want, you can talk to Kirsch, we can make a hard.
No,
line.
I understand your,
And
Mary.
and I understand that some of that property tax money will always have to work this airport, and it should, but I'm not saying that all of it should end up on the airfield side.
Right, and I think that's kind of an annual budget discussion, along with, carving out these development fund projects and being very clear, as you point out, about not only the investment in the project, but what's the return on that, and what are you
Exactly.
eligible to use that money in the future? That's got to be part of the discussion, I agree.
Very clear, yes. And then between this slide and the previous one, this
Right.
captures, pavement facility, et cetera. But the other things that are more operating costs, is that being addressed somewhere else? All I see is capital stuff in this.
Yeah, today we just want to talk about capital projects, capital funding, reserve concepts, and then at the next workshop, we'll have time to really refine the operating budget and recommendations for that.
Okay, so, okay.
I think today what we're looking at is just looking at a new framework for capital investments. And, all the points that you bring up, Mary, are very valid, but those are, decisions that we would be making in the future about how to spend those. So I think what we're looking at right now is kind of a high level structure.
Except for that if it's all development in one fund, it could be determined to be limiting. And I see, these are the pots you're setting up. And really, in one of the pots, it needs to be broken into two pots. Is what I would like to see.
I'm okay with more, as long as we're designating things and sticking to them and sticking with the plan. I guess that's my point. But absolutely, there is some aspect of where the money's coming from and how you can use it that we need to be very clear about. Next slide. Kelly, let me give you a chance to share your thoughts for a minute.
You might recognize this from our regular budget packet, but this is just a high-level look at cash and a forecast of where we think we're going to end up. So in 2022, we think we're going to end up about $1 million in capital projects, and then at the end of the day, after depreciation, 8.5 in cash. And what we're recommending here, and the idea, the big picture, and how we're going to get to these reserve levels from an actual cash perspective, is to set aside whatever that audited ending number is. In this projection, it's 8.5 for 2022. 40% of that gets put into a savings account for reserve, and we work towards whatever that number is each year to get to the funded level for 5, to get to 25% funded for the long haul, but come up with some number that makes sense to put aside from actual cash so that when we need it, we've got it there.
You're
Then-
saying a restricted account?
No, like an actual cash account, like a bank account.
A restricted reserve account, yes. A designated.
Is different
a
than we have
designated
done
reserve
ever in
account.
the past.
Correct.
I'm not disagreeing with it, I'm just trying to understand it.
Right. So we have, you know, the 6 million, and we designate it on the few slides back, right, on paper. But I want to put actual cash in an account so that when we need it, we have it at the ready. That's liquid.
And how do we decide to use that, Kelly Wu?
That's what we're talking about right now.
That would be based on the policy that is created for reserve policy that would talk about the funds that are being set up and the projects that would be reviewed, whether it's reserve replacement plan and study that's reviewed every 3 to 5 years, or if it's a development fund that's reviewed probably every year by the board for a long-term plan to save money. Those are things that would be part of policy to talk about what the right, and it would help, the formulas behind it would help recommend what percentages we're putting in which fund that's a designated fund.
And
That's
where did the
restricted. The board will
40%?
still have authority to change that, but at least
Where'd the 40% come from?
it's just for example, for discussion points.
So then that 40% would be split between the different buckets. And historically, we have our cash balance, right? We've got what's in the bank account, what's in LAIF, what's in our Wells Fargo advisor accounts. And that was enough to keep us going year over year, right? But what we're trying to propose here is what's going to happen in the next 5 years, what's going to happen in the next 10, 20, so that we can build up a reserve in addition to that, because that's funded us thus far. But what do we want to look towards in the future, and how are we going to pay for it? Does that make sense?
Like a sinking fund, right?
Excuse me?
It's like a sinking fund.
Yep, savings account,
Yeah.
rainy day fund.
Yeah, I use the analogy in personal finance. If we were parents and we were planning for the future, we were planning to send the kids to college, we were planning to retire at some point and have money put away in the bank. Right now, we really don't have that as an airport district, and so the kids aren't going to college, and we don't have a retirement plan. And so these are things, we're not fully built out here as an airport district. We have vacant land that we probably want to do something with on the air side and non-air side over time. And it's probably good if we start talking about those concepts, not only with actually what facility or we want to put in those locations, but the cost of those. And so we can start thinking about when that would happen and what the savings plan is to get there. So at some point we can send the kids off to college and we can retire. Right now we're in a very tight cash flow situation. For example, if we end this year around 5 million conservatively in cash, and that's it, that's all we have in the bank for next year, our cash flow next year, even with the planned revenue coming in, we've got to front all that construction on 220. We've got to front all that money before we get reimbursed from the FAA.
That's a good
And that's
point.
about $5 million, right,
Yeah.
is the plan right now. So we're going to be running really thin month to month next year. Thankfully, FAA is very quick in their turnaround and reimbursements, but depending on the timing of some of that and how it rolls out, we're really playing it pretty thin as an airport district, as a special district here. And we really should have much more robust cash reserves in place here, both cash reserves and capital reserves. If that helps illustrate the point of reserves. Yeah. All right.
I think
I really like how you're thinking, and that's a really good point in terms of you gotta pay it up front and get back filled. So I like this concept. Again, going back one slide where you have the capital reserve expense timeline and you're showing out 1 year, 5 years, and out 30 more years. Under development fund, I would like to see those subcategories, airside and landside, being specific to them. Or
Yeah.
development fund, airside, development fund, landside, because I think those are valuable as well.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think it helps us save money towards those projects so we know where the money will be used in the future as well.
And the only other comment I had was somewhere it seemed like in your staff report, you mentioned that it's, I can't find it exactly right now, but you mentioned that the federal money could go away or the tax money could diminish. And that would be difficult to foresee, to be quite honest. And I can't find the exact wording, but I got the feeling when I read it that you were concerned that they could go away. And the property tax money, if our property tax money was ever touched, you'd have 3,000 of the special districts going crazy in the state. And so I don't see that going away. And the FAA, because we can always make that 5%, they come to us and say, please do a project. Whereas if you're a municipal or county airport, they have a hard time because you're competing with fire and police and libraries and everybody. So I don't want to leave an impression that we could end up not getting those funds in the future.
Well, I think just, I think about it conservatively. When we think about half our revenue coming from our air side, non-tax-based operations, that's a big percentage of revenue that is potentially, can be disrupted from a number of world events or regional events. And then our air side, FAA funding that comes in the way of capital improvement projects from the FAA, that is a luxury that we've enjoyed here for some time. I would say, you know, should you bank on that for forever? Probably not, and you should be a little bit conservative on what we're planning for the future there as well. Part of our success in the past has been that we have had adequate reserves and an ability to get projects done. So we're able to front the money for projects, match the money for our percentages, and execute in a timely fashion that meets the needs and desires of that program within the FAA. Ideally, that continues. But again, these are things that can be disrupted, and they're not guaranteed.
David, do you have something? Sitting on your hands.
Oh, as the conversation
Speaker.
goes on, it's like
Your microphone.
I was gonna say, I do have questions, but as the conversation goes on, that one got answered, and that one got answered, and that one. So a lot of these are just clarifying. If we were to start building this war chest, does this influence the FAA with regard to granting us either way?
I don't believe so. I think I'm not talking about building $100 million or anything. We're talking about building adequate reserves to address the infrastructure we have for the future. I don't believe
But I
this
mean, you can't see, like, if they're making decisions about which airport gets what money, that they would look at our funds and say, well, that airport doesn't need it.
No, I don't think they look at it that way. I think they mostly look at it as in the way of we can actually execute projects and we have matching funds. A lot of the general aviation airports don't actually have the matching funds. Or as Mary mentioned, it's, you know, airports that operate under local jurisdictions instead of their own jurisdiction are competing for funds constantly with other activities. So in that sense, we're seen in a very favorable light. If we have more resources to match things, it seems that it would probably benefit us to be able to do more projects.
Okay. The next question I had, again, is a hypothetical. If we did build something like this, do you think that if this would, a future GM or future board would be less likely to even try to get grants because they thought they've got all this cash in the bank?
No, I don't know why. Well, I mean, I can't speak for the future folks, but it seems to me when the FAA offers an opportunity for airport improvement grant of $5 million to redo a runway, that you would find a way to accept that and match the funds, particularly if you have the funds, rather than spending $5 million of your own money for something the FAA has already collected tax dollars for and is reinvesting those back from a federal level back to local communities. So,
okay, and then the I do like the idea of, and I know you said you were going to look into this, of vault of some sort of protection against how the money is used that's defined by policy.
Right.
Because I would hate for this board, for example, if this board continues on into the future, that we're putting money away and we're putting money away and then something happens in 26 or 28, and the board changes and they take all that money that we put away and used it for something we would never have wanted used. So I would like to see some sort of controls, guardrails
Right.
on how that would,
And they'll only, just comment on that briefly, they'll only be limited, and maybe I'll defer to Josh on this, he's got a lot of experience across a lot of special districts. Ultimately, boards have control, and you can't necessarily tie the hands of future boards with some of these limitations.
right.
So-
And that's that, to be honest, that's a concern for me, because I don't know who's going to be making the decisions in the future, and if we're putting off things we would like to do now for a future board to take the money that we didn't use to do something that we might have done differently, I think that's a bit of a concern there.
Yeah, my past perspective on that is when you identify large projects that are significant investment, $20 million, we'll say, into a new facility.
Yeah.
As much as identifying the price tag, identifying a 5-year horizon of saving that money, probably would require a lot of constant communication with the district members, that this is happening, that you're saving towards this, and it begins socializing the idea and the concept of what you're trying to achieve. And in that process, in that public process, you'll get a lot of feedback. And hopefully it'll shape that project in the process. And by the time you reach the end of that, you'll have a stronger project, to be honest, that is better informed, or not done because it didn't survive a public process through multiple board iterations and public feedback over time. So I would say it's probably a stronger project that can survive that time frame. And so if you worry about a board that gets elected 5 years from now that is faced with this 5-year process towards this project that has continual support and funding, and then they decide not to do it, that is their decision, but it's a lot of momentum moving into it that probably would get a lot of feedback from the district members. It's something they've already bought into.
Okay. And,
If that makes sense,
and,
right.
yeah, my last question, and I don't know if this addresses what Mary was going at splitting that. On that slide that showed the 3 different pots, virtually all of that was, with the few exceptions, virtually all of it was airside expenditures that we're saving up for. Would you be opposed to adding a community development fund on this, so that the development fund that's there is for airside, and then we have a community that's,
I think that
because you're basically, we know, just let me finish.
Sure. Yeah.
Financially, we know that if we didn't have the tax revenue, we would be using 100% of our on-field revenue to survive. We would have no reserves of any kind at all. So we know that when we're putting money away, we're putting tax money away, right? So if we're putting the tax money away, for me, it would be a lot more, I love the concept of this, but it would be a lot more difficult for me to support this if I felt like all of the things that we were saving up for, none of those had anything to do with the community benefit effort that we're trying to make. So that's a concern for me, because it feels like we're taking tax money today and putting it into a fund that's earmarked for on-field investments.
Right. When I think about community investment with funds the way you're talking about, I think about it as an operating expense decision to, for example, the community partnership that's been set up with the Community Foundation. Those are all operating funds that would be given to a 1-year giving kind of program. And so if I was to set up something like that, I would do it on the operating side, not on the capital side, because I'm not hearing anybody say we want to build infrastructure with our capital funds somewhere else in the town of Truckee. It's in the district or on the lake. So I think most of it I've heard that's off the airport for capital investment doesn't exist. It's mostly an operating investment. The money is being set aside. So if we were going to create something like that, I would say it would be on the operating side, like cash reserves. It would be community investment on the operating side. It'd be an annual kind of giving thing, similar to what's somewhat earmarked in the budget now. Also, when I think about community giving, any thoughts on that, Kelly? I have one or two more thoughts here.
Oh, no, I agreed. It's just, that's in the operating side of the world, and we have that budget. It's a one-year thing. We don't need to necessarily reserve for it because it's already there.
But for example, if we've talked about housing, like workforce housing projects, that would be just considered.
That would be in the development fund side of things.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. That kind of a thing, which we would consider to be virtually exclusively a community benefit side of things.
Right, if we want to develop housing and we have a JPA, Joint Powers Authority that exists that we participate in, if we would like to invest in that activity at a level that would allow them to buy homes or build homes that would be eligible for our employees, that we'd have some agreement where we get some kind of return if the home was ever sold. That would be an investment in community infrastructure of the JPA, a government authority, that would probably fit in the development fund, I would say, on the non-air side for funds, and something we'd earmark funds that we'd save or annually give towards up to a certain level, dollar threshold. Does that make sense? Is that?
Agreed.
Can I go
Yeah,
on?
yep.
Am I on? Well, I'm all for community investment. That we do that with the money that's left over.
Microphone.
It's on.
Oh, okay.
I'm not far from it. Anyway, that's what we
Just-
have money that's left over, because we have a charter to run an airport. And it's not our community money that we're spending, it's our taxpayers' money that is earmarked for airport. Just want to put that on the record.
Yeah, and when I think about most of the new sources of revenue, as I look at the operating budget now and looking forward, I don't see our tax-based revenue increasing considerably. I think it's fairly steady. All the new revenue sources are all principally going to be airside revenues. As I think about us growing our revenues here, and that's going to be rents, that's going to be landing fees. Those are all. When I look at the horizon of potential increasing revenues or where this money might come from to put away in reserves, I see a large percentage of it coming from the air side, actually.
Well, there is opportunity on Soaring Way to ground lease and get some revenues.
Right.
We had one thing we looked at, which we basically rejected, and they went elsewhere. But I think Soaring Way is a possibility to get non-airside revenue if we chose to develop it.
Right.
And ground lease it, because I wouldn't want to sell it. I would want to do that. And I agree. And I've always spoke about doing community activities in more and more volume. So I'm in support of having a pot that is for community. I must admit I've been jaded on the housing, having worked on it so hard in my first term and nothing happened. 2 units. It was very disappointing. Maybe the small housing on the Soar Truckee campground area is a possibility, but that's awfully airside location-wise. So I'd like to see more money spent on the community. I said that in my 2 campaigns, and I think I said it in the Moonshine Inc. article. So I don't think we've starved the airside at all. We've done a very good job airside-wise. So I support community funds and doing something. Whether it's maybe it's a community building at the corner of airport and Soaring. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here, but I am community oriented and always have been.
I think particularly with the development fund concepts of what that might be and how we fund it, those will be. We're not going to solve that in the next 2 months. I imagine that would be a 6-month, year-long conversation of let's really scope out what these projects might look like for the development fund. And we'd spend the next couple months setting up these funds in these categories if the board is in agreement. And then we'd spend several months, both in a board, staff, and with the community, talking about what the priorities should be for what we want to put in as projects in the development fund particularly. The other two pieces are probably more straightforward, things that exist or new ideas that come up each year. The development fund is the big one that really gets to how you want to develop land or infrastructure here, airside, non-airside. Sir, question? Comment?
No, I was just thinking if you could do that in 6 months, that'd be really good. Maybe we got to hire you full-time.
All right.
No, I think that you're hearing consensus that somewhere the community development has to be in there. So we trust you to come back with that in the framework.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we increase our revenue on the air side, it gives you more flexibility we do with the tax revenue for the airport.
Correct.
Right. So next slide, next one after that, or go back one real quick. So this is just an example. These aren't the numbers this year for 2023. Kelly, you want to talk about these real quick or kind of rolling forward?
So
Is this 2A?
Excuse me?
We're on a 2023 capital project slide.
Okay,
Capital
thank
reserve
you.
expense timeline, sorry.
Got it. Okay.
So we have, in the next coming slides, broken down by category, some ideas on what we'd like to shoot for in 2023. So this is just the roll up, 1.7, broken down between the three different reserve ideas, and then just looking out towards 2024 to 2029, and then the long haul. You'll see next year it's heavier on replacement reserve, and then as the years go by, it switches the other direction towards
So,
development.
as I noticed, Director Stevens holding up his slide.
With nothing in it.
The budget presentation, this is live numbers today that you're seeing at this point. It was not in your budget packet. We've been working on this diligently in the last several
So I'm
days.
not crazy.
So no one's crazy, no one's missing numbers.
Well, let's not go that far, Mary.
So the numbers that are being presented today are, and of course we'll upload these for everybody to review afterwards. So these numbers, that's why I'm asking Kelly to go through them a little bit in more detail here because they are new.
Is that something you can put on, can Lauren put this up on the chair?
It's on the
It's on the screen.
It's on the screen right now.
It'll be posted online now.
Okay.
Yeah.
But basically, we have 1.7 million in the grand total, Mary, and then almost 100,000 for development, 122 for new machinery and equipment, and 1.5 for replacement reserve. And we'll go through what that looks like on the next few slides here.
Okay.
So the next slide here is the 20, and then you go back one real quick. And so what we've done here is, so this is the first time we're trying to break apart all these concepts into these buckets. It's not perfect right now, but we're getting there. Over the next month, we'll be able to refine this more as recommendations for the budget for 2023. Going past that is just kind of a roll-up of times 5 and then times 30, which is not very scientific or just mathematical. Those are things that we refine, as particularly when we get in the replacement reserve. Of course, the development fund doesn't have any projects in it right now, so those are just kind of placeholders, and none of it is tied back right now to how much revenue we plan on gaining on in our cash every year from earlier slides to be able to put into these different buckets that would be airside, non-airside in the development fund. So next slide, I guess the point is there's potentially obviously we need to be reserving a lot more money to address our baseline needs. So we're on the next slide, and this is a roll-up 2023 capital projects. On the left side is the description of the asset that for the 2023 budget that we, on our first scrub that we're looking at and recommending. The approximate cost is the next column over. The asset category by fund, and with these new funds, is the next category. And of course the year, kind of totals there. So starting on the left, these are,
I'm just curious, can Rory turn a camera onto the screen? Because it's not on the iPad, so I'm just wondering.
Hey, Mary, I'll share my screen so you can see it.
That'd be great, thank you, Emily, because yeah.
Thanks, Em.
you know, Emily was here. Yeah.
Let us know when you can see it, Mary.
Just pausing for a minute for you to get it loaded up, Mary.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, this is very helpful. Thank you.
So the first three items, development fund, the first three rows are things that are currently identified in our facility maintenance plan. The first two are, and these are things that I think lead to a bigger decision later that have to do with development fund. And that really gets around a conversation that we don't need to solve today, but going forward, we have a lot of money earmarked in the future towards a sprinkler system, a new roof, water hookups, re-engineering a roof, all on our warehouse, which probably adds up to around a $3 million range to be conservative. And so my thought on, so these are the items that get us towards thinking about this in more detail. The first two, looking at the engineering, how much capacity does that roof actually have if we put a sprinkler system on it and increase the weight? And then looking at the utilities mapping associated with bringing new water into running an actual sprinkler system at the warehouse. Those are things that we want to tackle next year, but it really informs our future decision about how much more we want to invest in the warehouse, or do we want to at some point draw a line of investment in keeping something around forever, or building something new that serves a similar need of the district. The next one, the third one, is long-term automated parking. I've mentioned this in past discussions. We have a very manual lot for a long-term parking now that is staff intensive in putting boots on cars, and I'd love to invest some money there to automate that whole system, so you're paying with a credit card to get in through a gate for long-term parking, and that way we're capturing an appropriate revenue for the expense of operating that. The next three items are new machinery equipment items. These are things that don't exist here now. It's additional security cameras. It's for our maintenance folks that are changing a lot of tires, balancing tires, rather than getting in line with other local facilities in the busy season. That's just doing that ourselves. We have staff capacity to do that in our maintenance operation here. And then adding a maintenance generator to give backup power to the maintenance facility, but also in the future be able to tie that over in a future project towards the fuel farm that we have, to be able to power that as well. And that's what the next item there is, replacement reserve, pump controls, and that's moving into three-phase power over there, so that we're capable, as we look at the following year, to upgrade the pump system there and be able to accommodate another tank over there, and another truck, replacing a truck as well, to be able to service our airside needs all season without power interruptions over there. We have next replacement reserve there is shifting some of our GME fleets, our weight vehicles, from gas powered to electric powered. The next one is upgrading the facilities in this room to accommodate. I wish I had Mike Cook here to talk about it a little more. The next one is IT file server. This is just upgrading and replacing, mostly replacing existing file servers that have as our backups. We're running pretty long in the tooth for software and hardware there on a 2011 vintage server. We have additional welder there replacing one that we have with another. That's reserve. We have IT camera replacements across the existing ones that we have that are a little dated or sun damaged in the lenses over time. Next page. Starting at the top, these are all replacement reserve items. This is 2 of 2 pages. We have firewall replacement. We have replacing carpet in the admin building here. We're replacing our fairly dated golf cart fleet with new ones. We are doing some improvement at the helipad over in Tahoe City through improving the surface there and addressing damage to weather damage to the platform there. We're doing an IT penetration vulnerability test, a PIN test they call it, to make sure that we are less vulnerable to outside malicious attacks.
That's the town.
Yes, there's plenty of local and national examples of not being well prepared. The next one is upgrading our accounting software system here to something that's more modern and flexible and that our finance team can work with in a more dynamic way. We are expanding the mower attachment from a very narrow one, I think it's 6 feet now, to one that's much larger, so we can cover more terrain with less man hours in a single pass. We are replacing a generator there. Going from the diesel to gas.
Natural gas type thing?
Natural gas hooked up to a line that's run here, so we eliminate the interruptions of having to run another diesel generator for carb requirements in the state of California, and also for just interruptions of fuel, and particularly in the summer season, or interruptions we may get in the summer season, the fire season these days. Hangar epoxy floors is a reserve item. We have a lot of concrete floors in a lot of buildings with lighting as well. Some of the lighting is really dated. These are the beginning of what I would call a hangar improvement project for our customers that are operating in the hangars. Rather than just having those concrete floors, actually sealing those floors or epoxying those floors to extend the life of those concrete floors much longer, and being able to clean up spills or mishaps that happen inside of hangars for those tenants, I think would be greatly appreciated, along with improved lighting in those facilities.
Is this all 240 hangars?
These are just the concrete ones, which is about 75%. That would not cover all of them. That would begin the process of that. This is a placeholder estimate right now based on bandwidth of staff and getting into these projects. We need to scope out the cost and pricing. But this would probably be a multi-year approach to improving our existing hangars that we have.
How could you actually do some of these floors on some of these hangars that are full of stuff?
We certainly, along with reviewing our hangar policy, we'd work on a long-term plan of doing row by row of hangars for these kind of upgrades in them, and as those are scheduled, we'll notify the tenant, and obviously we'll need to move everything out of those hangars in order to upgrade the hangars and then make these improvements. So that would be a well-coordinated activity on schedule, probably in the summer or shoulder seasons, not in the winter, with those hangar tenants.
It's just you've got a few that are going to be difficult.
And that's
an editorial comment.
Yes. We'll always work with our tenants to accommodate their schedules and our schedules and our needs to continually maintain our hangars and improve them. We have a flatbed truck. It's getting a little long in the tooth, and we'd like to replace that. We have a hangar door that's probably the largest hangar door I think we have on the airfield here that obviously has some history behind it, on schedule for next year. Is
that not safe? Is that hangar one considered not safe in the structural analysis, or is it safe?
I won't comment on that today. If it was not safe, we wouldn't operate it, and we
Correct.
require them to keep it
You know,
closed. So
And this is,
that gets to the wear and tear of items,
It-
and at some point, it's good to replace things before they fail, as opposed to breakdown maintenance.
Well,
So that's the way I look
that
at
door, I have read the lease and we are responsible for that door. And the concern, at least when I went and walked it with Dave Hoffman, is it's a very big door with wires as opposed to the big bands that we put in the executive hangars. And there's a concern, and we're responsible for it. If that thing goes down, that's a problem for Sierra Aero. And I know you don't think they pay enough, Mary, but the lease says we're responsible for that door.
I get
And,
that.
the last time I thought about this, I thought it was 100, now it's 175.
That's our estimate right now. I don't think we have a hard quote on that currently, but hangars and hangar doors are expensive, and this will be.
This is a big one.
Thus the need for increased reserves, particularly in this area. These are things that we have to continually maintain across all of our operations here.
Just being aware that we spent 1.2 million to build a charter flight operation on field, and we make a net of 20,000 a year on them. It just kind of is shocking to me.
It's not very much, Mary.
Yeah.
We have a Cattler on there replacing a very dated one that's probably in the old carb, part of our carb upgrade as well for emissions. And then we have our requirement as a matching portion of our planned one-way project. This is money we're paying out, not just fronting. We're fronting the money, but we're not getting this portion of it back. This is our match. And let's go to the next slide. If there's any questions about those individually.
There's some I'm not real thrilled about, and yet, is this our...
So that's our initial roll-up on this, and just to see where we're at, talking about reserve funds, looking at the list of capital projects as part of our budget for next year. We'll be refining this over the next month and a half, 2 months. This is
Okay.
our initial look at it.
Okay, yeah, so it's not...
So welcome feedback. We're not asking for final approval today.
Okay.
Just for feedback on concepts, this is about where the dollar value is landing, which is less than what was budgeted this year. But it is our initial look at.
And are these slides on the website now?
They will be when we're done.
Because I'd like to get copies of them, because,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
I don't
Me
have
too.
them.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. And this
In my
is
box. Thank
just
you.
part of our compression, getting ready for the meeting here and doing things, changing the format a little bit. So apologize for not having all these numbers loaded up ahead of time in the projects. We're getting there. We certainly will be in a better position at our next meeting to have those numbers ahead of time. Any last minute roll-up comments here? That's all I had on this presentation, and I welcome any additional feedback or comments on these concepts of reserve fund, reserve policies, and initial look at 2023 capital budget items as reviewed today.
So we'll be seeing this at the September board meeting, not before then, to talk about it in a workshop or anything. It'll be...
You'll see you'll see a refined capital project list for capital spend for 2023 as part of the operating budget we'll present in September.
Rob, do you need any kind of approval or anything? This is just a presentation today?
Just maybe consensus if there's interest in moving forward with the reserve policy and fund concept. So I can begin exploring that more, though I'm not asking for any hard commitment on it. If it's something you're absolutely opposed to and prefer the way we're doing it now, or some hybrid way of doing it, I'd love any kind of feedback. I think I've got it along the way. It seems like people
I'd like you to continue and see how this shakes out. I don't know how it's going to.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't think you can't lock future boards into what we want, because they can change it.
That's right.
Right.
And we've done that in the past. We've had a budget, and when we wanted to spend money that wasn't in the budget, we did it.
So in the 2022 budget, it was $2,030,500 on 2022 capital projects.
Correct.
And if I'm understanding this correctly, this would be.
We're recommending 1.7 at this point, 1.7 million for our initial look.
1.5 was in replacement reserves, 0.2 in new machinery, and 0.1. I was trying to get at the breakout as you had it.
For
For 2022 budget?
2023
No,
budget
just-
presented?
Yeah, for the 1.7, what's the breakout? How much of it's in replacement? How much of it's in new machinery? And how much of it is in development? I think it was on one of those slides, Emily. Okay, so the development fund's about 100K. New machinery, 0.12 and 1.5. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other feedback?
1.75.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have the percentages broken out, but
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else, Mary?
No, I'll have comments when I can actually digest a little bit and think about
Okay.
it, but that's the first time I've seen it. And conceptually, I'm okay, I'm just trying to get my head around. We had a lot of FMP stuff in this year, in the 2022 budget. Did everything that was out of the facility maintenance plan that we budgeted get done?
no, it did not.
None of it got done.
Not correct. You asked if all of it got done, and my response is no, all of it did not get done.
So I guess that would be something I would like to see, because what didn't get done in 2022, I would like to see a list of what didn't get done with those costs, because the facility maintenance plan had dates of when it was supposed to be done, and then we probably as a board need to compare the look-aheads for 2023 if it didn't get done in 2022, and that was a structural thing based on the facility maintenance plan. It might be of more importance than some of your other ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that as a role of management and something we're digging into and balancing what a facility maintenance plan says and what actually gets done has a lot of my interest,
Right.
along with the pavement management plan. So this is part of, I think, integrating with the Go Civics software program and integrating paper plans and what's actually getting done versus budget. I think there's a lot of area that we have work to do on these topics. So absolutely, these are things that management should be presenting roll-ups on to the board, not just in the financials, talk about what we planned and what we actually got done.
Would some of the things that didn't get done this year be in the list that we just saw?
Yeah, some of those are carryovers from this year.
And some are getting dropped, I assume.
Some are getting pushed out to 2024. Because I know we don't have capacity or it's not probably time to do them. So the reserve piece of this, from my experiences, is going to be ebbing and flowing every year. You have a plan.
Right.
Ideally, you have a tight plan that's 100% of what you budget, and you execute as close as you can towards 100%. And there's a lot of variety in that. So if you're executing around 80, 85%, you're probably doing a pretty good job. If you're doing around 50%, then your expectations are pretty far over reality. And we should tighten that up just as a budget process and a capacity process.
And the only reason I bring it up is there's a lot of buzz that this board and some members of this board are not following through on what needs to get done. And I would argue that point, because I am an infrastructure freak. I do think you take care of your equipment and your buildings. So I'm just bringing that up because If it's not getting done, why is it not getting done? What did you find that says we can bump it another year?
Mary, you have to keep in mind that the facility maintenance plan is it's a budget, it's a guideline. There are some things that we do this year that were through out that we had the capability, we had the right people in line that could actually do the work. We had the parts and materials that maybe, was on the list in 2 years, but we were able to do it this year. Or things like the warehouse sprinklers, where we're still trying to decide, does it make sense to do these if maybe the building can't handle the change to the infrastructure in the first place? So it's a guideline. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be done in that year. It might get shifted. It might not get done at all, depending on kind of where we're going. And definitely, especially where we're at right now in the world, the ability to get anyone to do the work, the parts and materials that it takes is a huge piece of that. And then the cost. Remember, this was done in 2020, the FMP whole report, and a lot of those dollars have changed quite a lot. Just keep in mind.
And I agree with what you're saying, Kelly, and I understand that. You also have sat through meetings where people have gotten up at the podium and blasted this board and particular people for not getting stuff done, and that's not fair, and that's why I'm pointing it out.
Absolutely, and I definitely want to differentiate between things that are in the budget that we're scheduled to do and things that are not in the budget and not approved.
Right.
Right.
Teresa, do you have any comments or questions?
I do not.
All right. How about you, David?
Good.
All right.
Good.
I think this is exciting. I think it's a new way of looking things. I understand that Kelly has embraced it to some extent. It makes things a little bit more clear, and I think it's going to be an evolving piece. But I like that this is the start of it, and I like the idea behind it.
Great. Thank you all for your feedback, and more to come in this budget workshop.
The presentation's online, so if you want the updated one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it a separate thing?
Part of the board materials.
Are we adjourning this meeting?
Is it in the files? Okay.
Is that what's next?
Until our 11
But do we have to technically adjourn this meeting?
I think so. Don't we
Yeah.
have to adjourn this? Yes.
I'll make a
Then we'll take
motion.
break till 3? I second.
All in
All
favor?
in favor?
Hi.
Okay.
Aye.
We don't have to really do roll call, do we?